Since the dawn of time, gamers have always been very frustrated with one pivotal choice. Which class should I play as when I'm starting out the game? Some of these classes have changed a lot over time, and more notably, you'll notice that the roster in Trove for the starting class has also evolved over time, leaving us a very slim pickings. Very tiny options. Very little to choose from. So today I thought it would end up being an interesting topic to discuss what is the best class that you should start this game as. Now, the main answer to this question is ambiguous. You should end up choosing the class that you think that you'll enjoy the most. So I'm going to end up previewing and giving you a sample, as it were, of what each of these classes is going to end up bringing to the table if you are just starting to Trove, as well as their strengths and weaknesses for the mid to end game. So for starters, we've got the Knight, which is a bit of a bumbling buffoon when it comes to Trove's playstyle, because the funny thing is that as soon as you end up using this character, based on the recent reworks of the class, you're actually going to be outputting the most damage possible, and you haven't even started the game. You haven't even leveled up the character, because oddly enough, where this character stands in the pie that is Trove right now is your left click is king. That is going to end up being your absolute strongest wave of defense when you are fighting the hordes of this world. Now, if you want to know the rest of your abilities, your right click is going to end up being a slam down, and you basically will damage enemies until you end up getting some sort of a burst that you can end up doing with your right click that ends up dealing a little bit more damage. And then there is also going to end up being your dash ability, which is by default going to end up being really good for movement. It does glitch out sometimes in the game where you'll just get stuck in an infinite void when you're fighting an enemy, but generally speaking, you will want to try and keep this and spam it once you unlock it so that you can end up going from point A to point B as fast as possible. And then the ultimate is going to end up being this shield, which if you have nearby allies, it should end up putting a shield on them, which is ultimately going to end up giving them some form of protection, but it's not really that big of a deal. It just, I don't know, it's just kind of there. Up next on our list, we have the delectably delicious Candy Barb, who is in a way an evolution of the Knight. Like, it totally feels like this character was the next additional step up. You're going to end up being a dual wielding character, which you're still just going to end up using your standard swords and stuff like that. But this character is a lot of fun. So your main attack, of course, is going to end up being your left click. Your right attack is going to end up being a spin, which ends up being God tier when you're at the late game. And then your number one ability with the class gem is going to have you jump straight up into the air. Sorry about that. And then without the class gem, you'll actually leap forward, thus giving you another ability that you would use for movement. However, let's say that I want to actually just go over to there. If I end up leaping, I can't end up canceling that animation in the middle of it, and I can't change my direction, which is one of the big problems with the class, unfortunately. And then your ultimate ability is going to be this giant Candy Crush, which all of the candy that goes inside your character is going to end up giving you different boosts. Most notably, it gives you attack speed, which is very detrimental for a lot of other classes to end up seeing their peak damage go up. The Barb is kind of the weirdo support DPS character in the game, if you can even call it that, because Trove doesn't really have much support. But whoa, hold the phone there, okay? Let's interrupt this nerd and talk about something that really matters. Selling out. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, for a limited time only. You'll be able to purchase my fantabulous merchandise. We got a Scyushi hat, bam. We got a hat based on the old logo, bam. Maybe you don't like the flat caps. Well, we got these options that I refuse to order because I don't wear any hats other than flat caps. Tell me, do you have an unhealthy obsession with a voxel game that has yellow as its main color in the logo? Bam! Well, here's a combination of my logo and the game's logo. I also have some other Trove themed shirts that are on the way, and I promised you guys I would make them like a year ago. Also, trust me when I tell you that these shirts don't all come in the shade of black. It's just that I only am allowed to order shirts that reflect the color of my soul. Speaking of dark wizardry, how do you like this? Wham! Now we've got a more subtle shirt that just has a tiny little logo here, which this logo is about to change on the channel, hopefully before the end of the year. All right, I hear you. You don't like all that colorful stuff because it makes you feel like a child. Well, don't worry. Slam! We've got text-based shirts for the only most sophisticated of brains. I did not hit her. I did not hit her. Oh, hi, Mark. Maybe like me, you'd prefer to be a complete sellout. That's where the long sleeve shirt comes in, because this only says the most beautiful text possible and has the most exotic of language letters with Japanesey. You'll never end up having any of your friends question what the shirt represents because we've got this disgusting thing on the back. Check links in the description where you can end up buying all of this merch for a very limited time only. And know that at the end of the day, you will be supporting yours truly directly by buying this merch. And don't ask me to decrease the price because I've already got it so dirt cheap that I barely make any profit from it. This merchandise is in no way in limited time and does not automatically make you cool. Anyways, let's get back to Charlie Know-It-All here, talking about his voxel cube game that for some reason you guys still care about. Next on the list, we have the Gunslinger, which honestly speaking at this moment, it's not really worth talking about. See, the Gunslinger is one of those classes that you can definitely main in the game, but as of right now, currently in Trove, the Gunslinger falls off hard when it comes to the end game and becomes just an absolute mess of a character that I cannot recommend to anybody. The funny thing is that out of all of the classes in Trove, you can use all of them just because you enjoy them. That could be the top priority reason why you use whichever class that you want. Gunslinger is the one where unanimously, even Gunslinger mains know what a pain it is to play this class. And it is unfortunate because as far as the developers are concerned, they don't see a problem with this character. The short answer is that the Gunslinger just can't really keep up with the amount of damage that other classes can late game, and most notably doesn't have any movement speed. Now, if you want a quick summary of what the Gunslinger can end up doing, your left click is going to end up being shots, your right click is going to be a charge shot. As you damage enemies, you can get a free charge shot that you can shoot instantly without having to charge it. Your number one is going to launch you up into the air, and then your ultimate ability is going to change all of your shots into charge shots when you end up using the class gem ability, which used to be the highest damage in the game once upon a time. However, without the class gem ability, it's just going to end up making you have increased attack speed and pew 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 pew. It's a lot of fun, but generally is lacking in that damage that I mentioned. Now, Boomeranger, however, does actually stand on its own right now. Granted, the PC version of the game, the most recent update that we've gotten has been the Boomeranger rework, which means that it's only a matter of time before it comes to you guys on consoles. Fingers crossed, it is going to end up being this month, but we don't know when it's going to release because the developers don't know when it's going to release. So the Boomeranger is going to end up being a very unique class where you'll end up getting more bang for your buck just because of the fact that you can use two different types of weapons. You can end up using a sword, but you can also end up using a bow. Your abilities are slightly going to change, however, based on whether you are melee or ranged. And of course, I'm going to be giving you guys the presentation today as if you already have the Boomeranger rework on consoles. So in melee mode, you'll end up doing these triple attacks, which will end up leaving down a cyclone that causes additional damage. Your right click's going to be a gigantic boomerang, and when you catch it, it's going to end up resetting the cooldown of your abilities. You'll be able to throw down a bunch of bombs with your number one ability eventually, again, keeping in mind that you have to catch this boomerang in order to reduce cooldown, which means that it doesn't work most of the time. And then your ultimate ability is going to be this pot that you throw down on the ground that breaks into a random effect. Some of them can be great, some of them can really suck. Now, an additional feature of the big boomerang of not only reducing your cooldown is going to end up being that if caught, it will increase your attack speed and your movement speed for a short duration. Versus the ranged version of this class, which at the end game ends up being the strongest, which is going to end up giving you 3 different shots. So you're going to shoot a fire arrow, an ice arrow, and then an exploding arrow on your target. The boomerang is going to change into shooting out 3 tiny ones, and these actually do stack. There's quite a few of them. And then your number one turns into a big bomb instead of a bunch of little bombs, and then your ultimate is going to end up being the same pot thing. Now, one thing to mention is that this boomerang in particular doesn't end up reducing your cooldowns. Instead, your base attack is going to slowly end up reducing the cooldowns of your abilities. Your passive also gives you this little fairy guy, which will change based on your costume, and is going to end up basically healing you when you're at low health. Oh, and before we move on, I almost forgot to mention that the class gem ability for this character is going to make it so that your bomb will summon these little chicken allies. Without your class gem, it's just going to be the bomb explosion without summoning these little babies. These ultimately end up being where the brunt of your damage is for Boomeranger endgame, but unfortunately, these little children have no brains. lines, and so they don't follow you around, not like our next character. And of course, last but not least, we have your boy the Tomb Raiser, which this class is basically going to end up being your summoner of Trove, your wizard of the necrotic arts. Essentially, you're going to end up having these little babies constantly spawning and being pooped out of you, but at the same time, you can end up using your base attack to end up charging these little gobbly wobbly souls you see floating around us, and you can right click at any time to end up summoning a bunch of these babies. Now, the main mechanic of this character is that as you end up summoning babies that overlap the amount of other babies that you have, so you can basically only have 5 babies out at the exact same time, right? And as you end up having additional babies on top of that, they will end up getting this purple health bar, which will ultimately end up giving them more damage. Unfortunately, they are always going to just slowly drain their health. Your base attacks are going to heal them, and eventually down the line, you'll end up getting your number 1 ability to summon this phantom, which ends up putting out a healing mist that'll help your babies as well. Without that class gem ability, your number 1 is going to end up having the function that it has additionally, which is making your character transparent so long as you have mana, and that is going to make it so that you take like 90% less damage or something. It basically makes you invincible. And then your ultimate ability is going to be this chongy freak who ends up getting bigger and stronger based on the amount of souls and babies that you have down out in the field. So as we end up having a whole bunch of these boys, we can summon the big boy. He takes energy from the babies so that he can end up being big and strong and ready to protect. But as we end up having purple health bars on all of our children, we can also summon an additional big chonky boy if I can get him to summon. And now he's even bigger, has a purple health bar, and so do all of our babies. This is how you have the most optimum amount of damage with the Necronomiconic character. So in the end, which class should you pick? What is the best starting character? Well, once again, it's going to be subjective. It's going to be based on your own opinion. Now, if you want a character that's really, really good at the beginning of the game, I would personally recommend the Candy Barb or the Boomeranger post the Boomeranger update that, again, still isn't on consoles right now. If you want a character that is going to be really, really good for the end game, almost all of them work except for Gunslinger, and Tomb Raiser ends up being super duper tanky end game while also having pretty decent damage. And then the Knight can end up being a little bit lame in its gameplay. As mentioned previously, you're just going to be spamming left click. So once again, for my money, I would say the Candy Barb is going to end up being the best all-around character for the experience of Trove for a melee character. It's a darn shame that the only ranged character that we have, a fully dedicated ranged character as a starting class, is the Gunslinger, because the Boomeranger does have the bow for sure, but the bow ends up becoming a lot more important for the late game of Boomeranger, and earlier on you would end up using the melee of it. Now, of course, as you end up playing the game a lot longer, you are going to notice that there is an overabundance of different characters that you can end up playing as, and well, that's where free to play anyways, it ends up, coming over to the crafting table so that you can end up crafting all of the different starter classes, which these resources are considerably easy to get. But then there's going to be some basic classes, some advanced classes. Maybe we'll end up having another video focusing on which classes you should focus on crafting, but generally speaking, that's going to cover it for the starter classes and the ones that you can end up picking at the beginning of the game. So let me know what you guys think. Let me know which class you ended up picking if you really want to. And if you want to end up having a follow-up video where we talk about which class you should craft first, I could end up obliging. I could end up doing something like that. But for today's video, that's going to do it. So smash like, sub for more, buy the merch you want to support the channel. And have yourselves a wonderful day, ladies and gentlemen.